In this podcast episode, host Janine interviews Tommy Robinson about the rapid cultural and demographic changes occurring in the West, with a specific focus on Britain. They explore the issues surrounding immigration, integration, identity, community breakdown, and political correctness. Robinson shares his personal experiences growing up in Luton, the rise and evolution of his activism, and his views on Islam, British values, and the future of Western societies. They also discuss the economic and political forces behind immigration policies, the role of government and corporations, and potential paths forward for cultural revival and political engagement. The episode begins with startling statistics, highlighting immigration's impact on cities like London and Brussels. Tommy Robinson frames these demographic shifts as part of a larger cultural transformation that many native Britons find disorienting and threatening. He argues that British identity and culture are under attack due to mass immigration policies, which he claims have been intentionally pursued by political and corporate elites. Robinson posits that the breakdown of traditional structures, like the family, church, and national identity, has left a void filled by competing ideologies, including Islam. Robinson reflects on his upbringing in Luton, where multicultural celebrations coexisted, but British symbols such as St. George's emblem were discouraged or banned. This, he says, sent a message to native Britons that they should be ashamed of their cultural heritage, while others freely celebrated theirs. He contrasts the strong community bonds found in various ethnic groups, particularly within Muslim communities, with the fractured and hollowed-out sense of belonging among native Britons. Robinson describes how segregated social spaces, like Muslim and non-Muslim playgrounds in schools, exemplify a failure of integration that has led to hostility and division. The conversation then shifts to the core idea of a collision of values. Robinson stresses that the problem is not simply about different cultural groups living together, but about the introduction of value systems that are fundamentally incompatible with British values. He shares examples of how Muslim boys growing up in Luton demonstrated aggressive behavior, including violence against girls, which directly conflicted with the values of his peer group. Robinson argues that Islamic teachings, as he interprets them from the Quran, encourage separation from non-Muslims and foster hostility, making assimilation impossible. He cites grooming gangs, violent attacks, and community segregation as manifestations of this deep divide. Robinson presents a critical view of the British establishment, particularly the police, claiming institutional racism exists in how law enforcement disproportionately targets native Britons while turning a blind eye to crimes committed by some Muslim communities. He alleges that the fear of being labeled racist has led to a two-tier policing system that prevents authorities from properly addressing crimes related to minority groups. This, he argues, has created a culture of fear and silence, which benefits political elites who want to maintain the status quo of open borders and mass immigration. According to Robinson, the immigration policies that have led to rapid demographic change are driven by a coalition of governments, corporations, and supranational entities like the European Union. He claims this alliance seeks to dismantle national identities to create a more manageable, controlled population reliant on the state and corporate interests. Mass immigration, particularly of low-skilled workers from Muslim-majority countries, is portrayed as a deliberate strategy to feminize and weaken the native male population, making it easier to govern. Robinson also points to laws passed under public pressure after manufactured crises, such as protests, as mechanisms to restrict freedoms and enforce state control. Robinson recounts his early life as a young, angry man, leading the English Defence League, EDL, a movement focused on opposing Islamic extremism and immigration. He acknowledges some early tactical errors, including aggressive street demonstrations that alienated potential supporters and played into government efforts to suppress dissent. After serving jail time, he shifted towards citizen journalism, documenting issues like grooming gangs and Islamist violence. Robinson's media presence and activism have made him a target of censorship, legal action, and social media bans, which intensified until Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, X, provided him a platform again. Throughout the interview, Robinson emphasizes the importance of restoring masculine virtues, such as strength, discipline, and community responsibility as a foundation for British cultural revival. He is critical of hyperfeminization and the loss of traditional male roles, linking this decline to increased social dysfunction and vulnerability. Robinson highlights a growing movement among young British men reconnecting with Christianity and physical fitness, which he sees as a positive sign. Citing Jordan Peterson's concept of the meek who inherit the earth, he advocates for building strong, disciplined men capable of defending their culture without resorting to violence unless necessary. Robinson is deeply skeptical about the possibility of reforming Islamic values to align with Western norms. He views Islam as inherently incompatible with British society because of its doctrines regarding Sharia law, segregation, and hostility to non-Muslims. He references polls showing high support for harsh Islamic punishments in Muslim communities and explains that cultural Muslims, those not strictly religious, are often powerless against radical elements that dominate community leadership. While acknowledging some peaceful assimilated Muslims, he argues that the extremist majority makes meaningful integration impossible on a large scale. The discussion touches on international influence in Britain, with Robinson criticizing the role of countries like Qatar and Saudi Arabia in funding Islamic institutions, mosques, and charities within the UK. He sees this foreign capital as undermining British sovereignty and accelerating Islamization. Robinson questions why the British government tolerates this influence despite its links to terrorism and extremism. He advocates for financial restrictions on investments from nations that export radical Islam and exert control over British institutions. Robinson warns of increasing social tensions that could culminate in violent conflict or civil unrest, driven by demographic changes and clashing value systems. He cites rising crime rates, gang violence, and police actions favoring minority groups as evidence of a society at breaking point. Highlighting the possibility of a tipping point sparked by incidents such as school attacks, he argues that peaceful protest may no longer be effective. Still, he maintains that his movement strives to avoid violence and instead seeks to rebuild British identity through cultural and political means. Robinson stresses the necessity of political participation, encouraging people frustrated with the current system to join political parties like Reform UK or Restore Britain to effect change from within. He rejects leading a political party himself due to internal divisions and infiltration risks, but sees culture as primary to politics, urging a grassroots revival of traditional British values. Alternatives like social media influence, documentaries, and community building are seen as complementary avenues to shift public opinion and reclaim national identity. Robinson's vision centers on a unified Britain where people from all backgrounds who embrace British culture and values can belong. His movement, United the Kingdom, aims to create a positive cultural identity centered on Judeo-Christian principles, free speech, opposition to mass immigration, resistance to Islamization, and rejecting LGBT+ indoctrination in schools. He optimistically points to growing political momentum and public awareness of these issues as signs that change is possible. Ultimately, he calls for a mandate strong enough to implement immigration controls, promote cultural cohesion, and restore national pride. The podcast also touches on parallels with the United States and the broader Western world. Robinson highlights the shared struggles over immigration, identity, and cultural survival. He acknowledges that America's immigration history differs, but underlines the importance of assimilation, economic contribution, and upholding common values. He warns against policies that prioritize open borders without regard for integration or security. Both he and the host agree on the urgent need for open conversations about these challenges, stressing that silencing dissent only deepens divisions and obscures solutions.